Hello and welcome to the London Mayoral Hustings with the built environment profession. The next Mayor of London will have until Thursday the 7th, 2020 to deliver a new London plan and replacement strategies. These documents, plus further policies, strategies and interventions around architecture, design, urban planning, the landscape, must help to ensure London's ongoing economic success on a global stage and ensure a buoyant real estate sector. Tonight, we are seeking to explore and discuss the main built environment challenges and priorities for the next mayor and the implications up and to beyond 2020. The event is joining together 8 built environment institutes and bodies, which together have a combined membership of 35,000 members to debate the big built environment issues at this May's election. And it's sold out, a reflection of how important these issues are to the capital. So we have the following candidates, and I'll go from my left to right. So Sian Berry, the Green Party candidate, Andrew Boff, who is representing the Conservative mayoral team, Caroline Pigeon, the Liberal Democrat London mayoral candidate, Val Shawcross, representing the Labour mayoral team, and Peter Whittle, the UKIP London mayoral candidate. And just to give you a sort of outline of what the format is. So we will have 2-minute opening statements from the candidates, which will be in alphabetical order. That will be reversed later, so no preference. And then we'll have some pre-prepared questions, which are on 3 major themes: growth, housing, and infrastructure. And then I will open up to the floor to ask further questions. We will, at the end, have closing statements from the candidates, which will be in the reverse order, and then there will be drinks upstairs afterwards. And finally, the job of the chair is twofold, which is to stop people talking when they've overrun. So there may be a cough if you go over your 2 minutes or a lot of time later, and also to get out of the way and let everybody else speak. So with that, I will hand over to Sian Berry for the first 2-minute opening statement.
Well, thank you very much. I, for one, have been really looking forward to this, and I'm really glad to be here. I've never met an architect or a town planner that I didn't like, and I've met a lot recently, especially since being a councillor in Camden. Sometimes I'm on the opposite side of the council chamber for planning battles. Sometimes I'm joining in with resident consultations for council plans. Sometimes I'm on their side as they fight to have a great building not demolished or to put in a bike lane or a new pedestrian area. And many of the residents in my ward of Highgate are architects themselves, because we're really blessed with a whole array of different architectural styles, particularly modern estates and buildings, which they really like to live in. As Mayor, my plans for London involve employing many more architects, surveyors and planners. The Greens Community Homes Unit would provide experts to help estates and communities put together plans for infill and piggyback home regenerations that don't mean mass evictions and preserve communities. And I hope would be a return to the tradition of the borough architect departments of old and would attract very, very good people. I've been visiting threatened council estates across London, from Cressingham Gardens in Lambeth, Central Hill in Crystal Palace, to West Kensington and Gibbs Green in Earls Court. These estates are well designed and work, and the residents don't want them demolished, they want them refurbished, and I've pledged not to have them demolished without very, very good reason. And I know how important the development of TfL land and the new London plan is. We can't afford to get these things wrong, and we need the help of all the professions to get them right. I hope we'll get to discuss a lot of the other important issues for London tonight, including providing housing that we can afford, including renters like me, how to build the right infrastructure to get people from home to work in the best and cheapest way possible, and how to design our city for a population that's ageing as well as the youngest region of the UK. And of course, the Garden Bridge. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you very much. There can be few cities on earth where you stand in audiences, as I have done over the past few years, and people are desperate to turn away investment. They're desperate to turn away money coming into their city. And the reason people turn away that investment and are rejecting what they see as the big penthouses and all the rest of it that we see going up down the riparian boroughs in London, the reason they're turning them away is because they don't see that investment as being for them or benefiting them in any way. And so it's very important that we have a London mayor who ensures that the investment that is coming into London does benefit Londoners and not just benefit offshore investors. We need a mayor who is going to not just be the tool of his party, not just be someone who is going to mouth what's being said at Whitehall and serve that up in City Hall. We need somebody who's going to fight for London's interests and not just for some wacky ideas and crowd-pleasing policies. We want somebody who's going to encourage investment in London, but ensure that investment ends up in Londoners' pockets. And for that reason, Zac Goldsmith is, I believe, the best candidate for Mayor of London. He is not somebody who's going to take the easy choices, he's going to take the right choices. So when, for example, we get a crowd-pleasing policy of cutting fares on transport in London, you people in this audience know that that has a direct effect on investment in the transport system, and somehow that's got to be paid for. And so Zac Goldsmith comes to this race as somebody with a proven record, not just of an independent mind, but somebody who's passionate about the environment. And if you question Londoners, things like air quality and the environment are almost at the top of their list, along with housing. So that's why Zac Goldsmith should be the choice of Londoners, and I hope would be the choice of all right-thinking architects and all other trades as well represented in this audience today. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. London's population is growing at a rapid rate, and our infrastructure needs to keep up with that demand, from housing and transport to schools, open spaces, and our energy supply. The next Mayor of London has a big in-tray to tackle. I have the experience London needs. As a Liberal Democrat on the London Assembly, I've been holding the current Mayor to account for the last 8 years. I've been working day in, day out for Londoners at City Hall, and I've seen firsthand the challenges we face. The scale of the housing crisis in London is well known, with the number of households expected to grow by over 500,000 in the next decade alone. And if we're to meet their housing needs, as well as to tackle the shortage of homes today, we need to more than double the rate of home building to around 50,000 homes a year in London. We desperately need to increase the supply of all types of homes, but especially genuinely affordable homes. And I have clear policies that are funded that will do just that. The other big challenge facing the capital is to ensure it's more sustainable, using fewer resources, creating less pollution, and being ready for the inevitable changes that are taking place in our weather. It simply makes no sense that London has the lowest level of solar panel use of any region in our country, yet it's one of the sunniest parts of the country. You know, London is a place where its buildings and its skyline really matter. Our buildings in many ways make London so special, and they're a key factor in drawing tourists and businesses to London. And as Mayor, I would like to work closely with architects and built environment professionals. My vision is to unleash the very best talent in this country to help build the infrastructure we need in London, with fair and open procurement, using the use of design competitions where appropriate. I want to ensure that London continues to grow with design that is world class. As Mayor, I wouldn't settle for anything less. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, and good evening. London is the greatest city in the world, but we are at a crossroads, I think, and if we don't act now, it could be too late. I think Londoners are being priced out of the city altogether by a terrible housing crisis. A housing crisis about to be made worse by legislation going through Parliament, which is designed to reduce the number of affordable council and housing association tenancies, and potentially destabilise settled council estate communities with pay-to-stay charges, which could force thousands out of their homes and possibly out of London. The beauty of London, to me, has always been that it is a city of almost infinite variety and possibilities. It is a city where we have the old and the new together, the high-tech and the heritage are equally valued. And we have communities, rich and poor, living almost side by side. It's a dynamic place where people come from around the UK, from around the world. They come together to make a better life for themselves and play a part in the world's most democratically and socially successful city, I would say. And I think Sadiq Khan's story, their family story, are kind of typical of that London aspiration, hard work and achievement. He grew up in a council estate and had the benefit of a good state education and an opportunity to go to university. And I think his grief, our grief in the Labour movement, is that sadly a child growing up in London now doesn't necessarily get those opportunities. There's too many children who are growing up in families where there are insecure private tenancies, in overcrowded conditions, and parents impoverished by unaffordable rents. And that's why we've got to act now, and why I'm asking you to support Sadiq Khan, because I do think he is the mayor who has the experience, the values and the vision to do this job well. He's been a local councillor, he's been a successful professional, he's been a transport minister in London, and he's brought with him the vision and the practical nous to do this job as well as it needs to be done. The GLA is a really unique institution. It does bring together the planning powers, the transport strategy, the investment, the funding, all the tools together where we can develop our city, meet our housing needs and tackle our employment needs and provide a better, a cleaner and a more livable environment. Sadiq said that he wants this election to be considered to be a referendum on our housing crisis. His top priority is to begin to fix the Tory housing crisis and have more genuinely affordable homes for Londoners. So I know there will be questions on transport and architectural issues tonight, but I just want to make that big plea to you. Please understand that this is a city that is in a crisis, and I think our candidate, Sadiq Khan, will offer us the leadership and the guidance and the action to take us forward. Thank you.
Well, that felt a bit like Dead Man Walking there, actually. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Peter Whittle. I'm the UKIP candidate. We start this election from third place in London. Our vote's growing here all the time. As the third candidate, I do have to say it's a great disappointment that neither the Conservative nor the Labour candidate felt they could be here tonight for what is one of the most important hustings, I think. But we do indeed stand at a crossroads, I think, in London. And this affects everything about our built environment, whether it be housing, commercial property, our public spaces, our green spaces. It's already been mentioned that the population is growing at about 1 million a decade. So what that really means, according to Boris Johnson's most recent report, is that by the year 2036, roughly, we will have to make provision for basically the size of another city, i.e. Birmingham and Coventry combined. That's how much London is going to enlarge by. It might come as no surprise to you that I think that as well as looking at the supply side of things, as well as looking at the housing and how people are going to work, where they're going to work, jobs, housing, social services, and the rest of it, I think we should actually look as well at the demand side. And I think that this is something which is crucial that we should actually discuss and have a debate about is what kind of city do we actually want in 15 years, in 25, in 35 years? And I think, therefore, one has to look as well at the immigration policy of the country generally, and obviously that affects London. So I am the only candidate who will actually talk about this, but I think it's crucial when you're talking about infrastructure. Similarly, I would say that as a Londoner born and bred, I do sense that people are increasingly separated from their environment. They feel they have no power over it. So one of the things that we would certainly want to do is to return some of that power to people in the decisions which are made in terms of big developments in their city. And also finally, I will also end on the Garden Bridge and say that one thing we don't need are expensive vanity projects. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So we're going to start with the subject of growth. And we've got a question, and then I'll probably do both these questions and then open it to the floor. I think that's probably easiest. So the first question was a very long question. Mounting evidence is showing that London is not able to meet its housing demand on previously developed land. Recent publications and research suggest that Metropolitan Greenbelt contains much brownfield land and with good access to infrastructure. Considering this and how much London has changed since the Greenbelt was designated, is it time for London to reconsider sustainable development in the Greenbelt as a way of meeting its growing housing demand? Well, I didn't get boos. If yes, how do we provide future generations with the benefits of having open green land and protect the historic character of towns in the countryside within the Greenbelt? And if no, how do we meet a growing population's demand on a fixed supply of land? And to be fair to him, I think, Andrew, you should go next and I'll move down.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, if that's okay. And I'll give you a minute each. Sorry, it's not very long, but that means we can open it to the floor. Not long at all.
I think the question is, should we develop Greenbelt land? The answer is no. I will say yes if we first develop Hyde Park. There is a marvellous example there of a piece of land that is ideally placed. And if we only built homes on it, it would solve an awful lot of London's housing problems. But we don't. And the reason we don't is because it serves a purpose. And the Green Belt serves a purpose, and it is possibly the most successful post-war policy that there has been, because it's absolutely done what it said on the tin, which is to stop urban sprawl. There is a problem with land in London if you only want to do it in London. If, however, you decide not to be constrained by a political boundary that was innovated in the 1950s and now has no longer any relevance, then you will have a problem. But if you decide not to be constrained by that, then there's plenty of green land outside London. And as far as I can see, one of the other very successful post-war policies has been new towns. We should seize that policy and start building. Start building more and more and more, probably about 40 around London. And that's something certainly I'll be urging Zac Go to do when he is mayor.
Caroline.
We absolutely need an Olympic effort to tackle the housing crisis. As Liberal Democrats, we have a fully costed plan where we'd keep the £20 we're all paying every year as part of the Olympics and turn that into a housing levy against which we could borrow £2 billion to help build the homes we desperately need. 50,000 of these would be council homes and 150,000 would be for private sale or rent. But the hard truth is the private developers are not building the homes we need. We've got lots of planning permissions granted. They're not building out the homes we need. And that's why I'd set up my own building company at City Hall to build these homes. And alongside that, I'd set up a construction academy to actually get the skilled workforce. We know there's a crisis in construction jobs in London. I would actually train up the Londoners to be able to do the jobs, to build the homes that we desperately need. I would not build on the green belt. It has served its purpose very well. It's there to help mitigate against climate change and flooding, and it needs to stay there. But beyond London, we do need to look at the new garden cities that are being developed. And I would like to extend the Seaside and Country Home Scheme, which the GLC set up. It's still run through City Hall. I really would like to see that extended to build homes to help Londoners who want to downsize, who want to move out of London, older Londoners to give up their larger social tenancy homes so that can move on to someone else on the waiting list. I think that's how you tackle the London housing crisis.
Val.
Yeah. Well, you know, our generation inherited the green belt, and I think we have a duty and responsibility to pass it on to the next generation. And I think the economics of brownfield land is quite important. You know, there is a lot of brownfield land. There's been many studies that have shown that within London. There is a lot of unused and underused capacity, but a lot of that land needs decontamination. And if we start opening up cheaper land on green belt, then actually we risk actually damaging part of our children's heritage for something actually we should be trying to tackle by doing the reclamation of land from within London. I also think it's true to say that people talk about land, but there are over 270,000 planning consents which have already been granted for housing units which are not being actioned at the moment. So this is a much more complicated problem than availability of land. I would also agree, I think, that we have other issues to be contending with now. One of them is climate change, and it is really important that we keep our green belt. Climate change adaptation and dealing with flooding, I think, is something that we will increasingly see the need to tackle. So let's not build on green land. Let's do a proper job of increasing densities with good design on our existing urban land and making sure that we tackle head-on decontaminating and reclaiming brownfield land which is being underutilised in London.
And Peter?
Yep. I certainly agree with brownfield sites. We should have a proper brownfield site registered because it's a bit sort of piecemeal at the moment. I live on one myself, actually, on what was a brownfield site at Woolwich Arsenal. And London has got, I think, about a third of all brownfield sites that are in the UK. As for the green belt, I mean, I think it should not be touched. Absolutely should not be touched. But the reality is, I think, that it's being encroached upon now all the time. Havering is, I think, the second greenest borough out of London. And I think that there are proposals there which would take up about 35% of the green belt. This is sort of happening, as it were, by stealth. But what worries me is that we just heard here about density. We cannot basically repeat the mistakes of the past. Some of the proposals now for various developments have got the most extraordinary density, things like 3,000. There are some proposals up for 3,000 people per hectare. This sort of thing, it's just simply not right. It has never worked before. It just does not work. The fact is, what we need to do with housing, and I'm a great believer as well in social housing, is we've got to make houses, build houses, we're actually good for families, for everybody, where people can put down some roots and actually feel that they're part, if you like, of the soul of the city as well. It's not just about economics. So, for example, in terms of social housing, absolutely, I think it can be an absolutely noble enterprise, and it was. I don't like it when people talk about sink estates and these derogatory terms. I think that it's got a great place to play in the housing market. But I think we have to think there is of the quality of life of people in those houses, and not just build them high and sell them very expensive.
We'll go on to the second question, and I should probably... Oh, sorry, Sian, yes. Sorry, yes.
Thank you very much.
Just trying to rush us through a little bit.
So I'll join, I think, most of the others in saying that I don't agree we should open up the green belt. I think it's a very defeatist attitude. We've got at least 10 years worth of building to do within London's borders, and I think we can get more out of it than what we're already estimating at the moment. Part of the reason we're putting forward the community homes unit is because we think it's important to build on top of and infill some of the areas that we already have. And when you go and deal with the residents properly, when you go and give them the tools they need to do their own master plans, they know their areas better than even the most talented professional who's seen it for the first time. They can make plans, and this has been shown in the Andover estate in Islington, where architects, planners worked with local people. They fitted in so many more homes than the council plans originally had put forwards because they knew their area, they were creative, and they worked with professionals to put together a plan. And I think that's really important. Darren Johnson from the Greens has been on the Housing Committee for quite a long time now. He's produced a really good report you should all read called Where Can We Build More Homes? And that's analysed the potential of some of these brownfield sites and found there were at least 70,000 homes we could put into areas, small sites and infill sites, and on top of existing blocks without demolishing them, to make the most of it there. So it's really important that we do all of that, that we have the right hierarchy, because the Green Belt has a couple of purposes. One is constricting development within the area, keeping things dense, making sure that we're not doing sprawl like Los Angeles, where people have to travel enormous distances to get to work, but also to provide access to green space for Londoners. So I don't think it's just important that we protect the Green Belt. I think we need to protect our metropolitan open land within London as well, and we can do it. London's population will grow and grow, and at some point we might want to rethink, but let's not do it too soon, because we know that the developers will take the easy route if we relax things too soon.
Sorry, now moving on to the second question. And the bad news for the candidates, I'm going to deduct however much time they went over from how long they have. We hardly have the skilled workforce across all aspects of the built environment and construction capacity to maintain current levels of output. How do you plan to meet your ambitious house building and infrastructure targets, which would mean at least doubling output? And Caroline, your turn to begin.
Yes, absolutely. Well, in this election, we hear a lot about candidates being sons of bus drivers. Well, I'm the daughter of a carpenter and someone who worked in construction his whole life. So it's very familiar to me in how we absolutely have got to skill up our workforce. In London, we set up the Tunnelling Academy for Crossrail to skill up the workforce there. That's why I want to develop a construction academy, which would skill up young Londoners into the skills of building the homes we need and all the other jobs that go around that to be able to build the homes that we desperately need for Londoners. And if you look at the further education sector and the skills budget that the Department for Business has, they're all coming to London, to London's government over the next couple of years. There's a huge opportunity there to work with the industry, to work with business, to work with the FE sector, to get the training courses that absolutely skill up our workforce. But alongside that, we need to look at developing more apprenticeships. And I would set up a brokerage scheme through City Hall where we'd be able to match the employers with the young people who would like those high-quality apprenticeships. But also, before we get to that stage, we need a London-wide careers service. Too many young people don't know the huge opportunities there are in the construction sector and so on. It's really important that they are shown those opportunities at an early stage, and I would bring that in at City Hall.
Val.
Actually, Caroline and I have had the same experience at City Hall of seeing these things work, and we know we could make them work better, I think. Certainly, the current mayor has underachieved on apprenticeships, and although education and training isn't a principal responsibility of the Mayor of London, there's actually a lot strategically that can be done to promote the take-up of those, the training courses that are available. And I think one of the things that we've observed is that, London wastes a lot of money and it wastes a lot of talent by the fact that we don't schedule our projects properly. If we had more devolution, I think, to control the timing of our major projects, you could move seamlessly from, say, the Crossrail 1 to the Thames Tideway Tunnel to Crossrail 2, and you could actually develop a career in London for engineers, designers, and other construction professionals, so that actually it made sense financially for London, but also sense for people to develop those careers in London.
Sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, no, apprentices, absolutely. One of the great neglected areas, without question, of the past 20, 30 years. I would completely agree with that. On a broader point, though, as well, how many young people going to state schools in London actually think of becoming an architect or an engineer? I think nowhere near enough, simply because social mobility is virtually ground to a halt. And I think that we've reached a situation now, we've gone backwards, actually, where these sort of areas don't even appear to be open to many young people from the state sector.
Sian.
Yes, I'd agree with a lot of that. The real opportunity I think we have is with the devolution of the further education and skills budgets, and I think it's really important that we do also get people interested in these topics much earlier. I've got an engineering degree. My colleague Caroline Russell has an engineering degree as well. She was originally an artist, and she retrained as a civil engineer, and but then she became a transport campaigner, and now she's standing with me for the London Assembly. And that's quite an unusual career path. We need people to get interested in these subjects earlier on in school. So I think we need mayors, we need companies, we need the London Housing Company that we'll set up to be evangelical about the opportunities there are and how interesting it is to be involved in building things. The other thing I'd say about apprenticeships is it's important that we get smaller firms able to use apprenticeships, and part of our housing plans is to be breaking up the big developments into smaller plots, helping smaller developers, more creative models develop. And we want those firms and those people to be able to bring apprenticeships as well. So it's important that we change the way that apprenticeships work to make it easier for small firms who don't find it easy at the moment.
And Andrew.
One of the best things that Diane ever did, not many sentences start with that, maybe, was to ask a question at the time of the Olympic build phase of how many of her residents of Hackney North benefited from the build phase of Olympics. And I don't know if anybody remembers that answer. It was 4. 4 people got an apprenticeship or job as a result of the Olympic build phase, because much as we can bring the projects online, we haven't got the trainees to do the job, and so we rely on importing them. And there's nothing wrong with that. Apparently I'm going to be frightened about talking about immigration. I'm not frightened about talking about immigration. It's been nothing but of a benefit to London immigration, and it will carry on being so. And but what is important is that we recognise that apprenticeships now have turned the corner. There is a massive increase in apprenticeships under this mayor and under this government, because we recognise we need not just the skills of engineers, but we need the skills of people in those associated trades. It is vital for London's future.
Thank you. Let's open this up to the floor, because I'd really like to hear it. So just to be clear, there are 2 other categories, housing and infrastructure. So if you could keep the questions to being growth related to what people have been talking about, we'll start here. Thank you very much.
Chris Hampson, Chair of London RIBA. I'll say what I've got to say, then I'll work out who I'm going to give the question to. I think it's obviously we're absolutely in awe that we're going to solve the housing crisis at this, any minute now. And there's lots of political rhetoric and bravado about it. Absolutely fantastic. I do seem to think it's a bit like Groundhog Day. We've been sitting here for very many years thinking, well, when are we going to solve the housing crisis? And there's obviously been some beacon of light which should just solve the problem. I think the question really is, and it's a nuts and bolts question, we haven't managed to solve it for the last 4 years. We haven't seemed to have greatly increased the housing being built. Nuts and bolts, how are we actually going to do it? We can't build high, we can't build low, we can't build on the green belt. The brownfield is often owned by Transport for London or the rail network. How are we actually going to do it? So I think it's very easy to be standing there and saying we're going to do it, but how do we do it? And it's a question for Caroline.
Oh, right. Okay, that's fine if you want to take just one question. It's really important that we bring together the public sector land that there is, and we know there's huge volumes of it. Transport for London is already doing some quite creative work. Look at St James's Park, 25% affordable housing there in central London. There's some really good work that you can do there. But actually the difference between myself and other candidates is I've got a funding stream. I'm going to keep the Olympic precept. I'm going to borrow against that up to around £2 billion, which we can then spend to build the housing on public land and also working with developers on other land. It's really, really important we look to do that. There's also the other challenge about the value of land and the cost of land in London. So what I would like to do is that for there to be another land use class which talks about public sector housing, which actually if you had that class and boroughs and the London plan could designate certain sites as public sector housing, which would help to bring down the cost of that land and help it be very clear that when the public sector selling a police station off or whatever, that it's quite clear that that land is designated for social housing, and therefore it becomes more affordable. It's really important we do that. But I've got a funding stream, I've got the land, and I will work with developers and the boroughs to deliver this. And I think it's really important to have that determination as mayor, and that's what I have.
Can we have another question from the floor? At the front. I'll work backwards too.
Let me get the chance.
Amanda Clack, President-elect for the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. Question for you in relation to infrastructure and how you would use London's existing and future infrastructures to actually help enable the housing crisis.
And is it for everybody? You want? Okay. So I think you can only have about half a minute each. I think Val, it's your turn to start then.
Okay. I think this is the key capacity of the mayor in City Hall, that he does have the power to link developments in the transport infrastructure with opportunities for opening up land and facilitating and increasing densities in some areas. And if you look at the infrastructure we've already got, so you don't always have to talk about new infrastructure, but if you look at things like our rail network in London, there's a lot we could do with targeted investment to increase the capacity of the system we've already got. And I think tying those two things together is the key to it. And it certainly is the case that there is a lot of land available to Transport for London. The mayor has his own land banking, and other public organisations in London, whereby you could actually release an awful lot of that land with targeted transport investment.
Peter.
Yeah, well, in terms of transport specifically, I mean, HS2, it's not a specifically London issue, but it has the most extraordinary impact, it will have the most extraordinary impact on London, particularly parts of North London, obviously Belsize, Camden, Euston, of course, and going out. I'm implacably opposed to that. Now, although the mayor has, the dirty secret about the mayor is he actually has relatively few powers, but he can certainly galvanise opinion. And I would like to use some of that shocking waste of, what is it going to be, 80 billion for a white elephant project to actually properly invest in the infrastructure of London transport. I think it's by far the greatest priority.
Sian.
I mean, I've worked as a transport campaigner for the last 4 years, and I do know how important it is to integrate transport and planning. I think it's absolutely crucial that we do try the first principles of this, which is reduce the need to travel when we plan our new housing. We need to be planning neighbourhoods with jobs, with places to live, and with services within walking distance. That has to be a priority when we're planning new areas. I would review the whole of the infrastructure plan that we have at the moment. There are some really, really mistaken things in it, like new road building, which we know won't lead to less congestion and will keep people in car dependency, and is a hugely expensive opportunity cost when it comes to investing in infrastructure. So I'd review the whole thing and look at ways of moving people around the city in the most efficient way possible. And I mean people, not vehicles. It's just so important that we bring those principles to bear, and the whole thing does need a review.
This question exposes the fact of politics, which is most parties agree on about 85% of the agenda, because it's absolutely the case that we all agree that we now have to link housing developments to infrastructure developments. And that's why, for example, Thamesmead doesn't work or is perceived as not working, and why Barking Riverside will work. Barking Riverside, there's £170 million going into an extension of the Gospel Oak. I know this because I live there, to Gospel Oak, the Gospel Oak to Barking line. And that means that unlocks the potential, gives you a property uplift on the rest of the land. It means it makes those developments viable, and it then means that you can deliver for that £170 million, considerably more in terms of development. But what you've got to watch out for is the difference between the parties on this, on about investment in infrastructure. If you are going to create the obstacle and you're going to carry out this commitment of a £1.9 billion bill for keeping fares artificially low, which is what Sadiq Khan has promised, it means you won't have the investment for these infrastructure projects. And it will start to be a tax on housing. It will affect housing developments in London, just trying to keep the fares low. That's what the maths says. That's what TfL say. And that's what I know Val tries desperately to try and get TfL to say something else. And they keep saying it's going to cost you money if you suppress fares.
Okay,
so
Caroline.
it's a housing issue, fares.
Infrastructure obviously is essential, and the transport we've already heard from others on the panel. It's really important. We see things like Crossrail too. It's so essential to keep London moving. The tram extension down to Sutton has huge potential to build more homes in that area and help with the medical research facility there. Really, really important. Metro Rail's got potential. We've heard about Barking Riverside. We need to invest in those forms of transport, for me, rather than some of these road crossings which the current mayor is proposing. But the other big thing is, if we're going to invest in transport infrastructure, if we've only got so much money, I wouldn't be putting 60 million of public money into the Garden Bridge. I'm sure we're going to come on to that later, but that's a project that should be dead in the water by now. We should not be wasting public money on a project like that when there's so many other really important transport schemes that will help with the regeneration, help to build the homes we need, and support businesses across London. But we've also got to invest in our own sustainable energy. I've talked about solar power earlier. We've got to look at combined heat and power. We've got to make London more sustainable, and that's where the infrastructure needs investment as well.
Could I just make one point as well, adding to that actually, is that TfL, you've got to lead by example. The amount of waste in TfL is just unbelievable, even in terms of salaries. I think they've got something like 33 press officers at the moment, and that's after a cull. I mean, essentially, I think this is a great way as well of actually making savings, and that's before you even get to the consultants they spend the money on.
We have actually half already moved on to housing, which is slightly inevitable because these things are so overlapping. So I'll give one of the two questions because we've actually largely covered the other, which is, are residential towers the answer to the housing crisis? What is your policy on tall buildings in central London, given most are not within reach of average Londoners and have a substantial effect on the city's character and skyline? And I'll just add that the other question was looking at having a supply of truly affordable as opposed to nominally affordable homes. But I think those things are overlapping. And then I will let the candidates answer, and then I will open up to you to ask questions on housing. Peter, I think it's your turn to start.
Tall buildings?
Tall buildings, yes.
Yeah, I liked tall buildings. I don't like all tall buildings. I like some tall buildings. I think that there's something like 260 tall developments which have been sort of passed, as it were, and are waiting to go up. I think we sort of reached a kind of point now where you've really got to look and say, well, actually, what value do these things actually bring? It seems to be odd, when you go around and you speak to the conservation people and heritage people when you're doing this job and this campaign, and they say, all the candidates come, and they say, oh, wonderful we are, and all the rest of it, and then suddenly, when people become mayor, I don't know if they get some sort of edifice complex or what, or is it sort of like that, they say, well, I'm mayor of London, but actually I'd quite like to be mayor of New York or mayor of Singapore or something like that. So this is not quite good enough, So I think that what it means, it's not just, the aesthetics of the thing, but if a big development goes up, it has a great effect, for example, on people's health. It has an effect on the light that they get, residentially speaking, in their everyday lives. All of those sort of things matter.
Okay.
I just want to say one more thing, is that what is crucial, I feel, is that people...
You're in danger of losing a vote here, definitely.
I'm sorry. People should actually have the boroughs in which these would be going up, particular projects, should have referenda which are binding on the mayor, whether they want the thing or not.
I don't have an even evangelical opposition to tall towers. I really like the Barbican, for example. But there are two towers going up on City Road, next to where I used to work, called Lexicon and Canaletto, and they are both very, very tall residential towers. And I find them upsetting, not just aesthetically, but because I know these are just being built for investment purposes. When you ask Londoners where they want to live, they don't want to live in tall towers particularly. They're being put up so high in order to get more profits and more investment. And I would feel very differently about them if they were being built by a cooperative, for affordable housing for people to live in. I know I would, but I do not like the model that we have at the moment where these big residential towers are going up purely just to be sold off. So I think it's important that we do something like the Skyline Commission that's been proposed that looks at the quality, the affordability of homes and tries to make sure that when we put tall buildings up, they go in the right place.
Andrew.
Even the evangelists like the Skyline Commission actually like tall buildings in the right places.
Yeah.
Personally, my own personal view is I think their architects toss. But, you know, that's my view. Zac's view is very clear on this. No more tower blocks in outer London unless they have clear consent by local residents. They should be reserved for inner London. You know, they're not London. London is a low-rise city. And I'm always astonished that architects can come up with wonderful, great big tower blocks, but they can't build a satisfactory container for a wheelie bin. You know, that's really, that's when you would have received the peak of your, you know, your peak of your profession is if you can have a container for a wheelie bin. That was a little bit provocative because I want to respond.
Thank you. We have seen an absolute explosion of tall buildings in London. In 2000, the London Eye was the 4th tallest structure in London, and 15 years later, it's the 22nd. So we are seeing this great explosion. And too many, often in my view, are boring, they're below average, they're not quality enough design. I would look as Mayor to strengthen planning policy, to restrict the location of some of these skyscrapers. I don't like things like the walkie-talkie and cheese place. I think it's really important we make sure we have quality design. And I would have a team of people from, I'm sure many in this audience would be on it, who would be able to advise me on that. But I also would set up this Skyline Commission to advise on design and the impact of these tall buildings on the environment. And I would also review the existing protected views and look to expand some of those. I think it's a real concern that all sorts of projects, including the Garden Bridge, are going to really damage those protected views in London. In opportunity areas, tall buildings, you know, in certain areas can be good, they can be right, but we've got to make sure local communities are properly involved as well and engaged in that. And that's really important as part of this. In the right place, they're good, but they need quality design.
Al.
Yeah, tall buildings are not the answer to the housing crisis, and in fact I think just the opposite. They're very often, because of the economics of building a tall building, low density occupation and they're very expensive properties by and large. I think there is a place for tall buildings in our city, and I think Sadiq's approach is actually, it should be part of a design strategy for the city. It is about having a policy-led approach to where you go up and actually having a view about the shape of the city as a whole, the shape of those buildings in a context, and not just looking at them as individual buildings. I think some of the tall buildings we have, because of the good quality design, are really iconic and beautiful buildings. But I think, you know, we do not want a city where there is fragmentation and buildings that stick out like a sore thumb. I think it's time we had a broader view of the design and shape of our city.
Could I open up some more questions on housing? And we still have infrastructure to come to, so nothing too infrastructure based. Can we take those two together, actually, stand next to each other?
Thank you very much. Richard Summers, past president of the Royal Town Planning Institute. We need a much more strategic approach to this problem of housing and growth in London than the questions and the answers have touched on up to now. Garden cities, brownfield land are a drop in the bucket of the accumulated shortfall of housing in London. We need to look at the Greater South East, and in the absence of regional planning mechanisms, which we don't have anymore, we should use the duty to cooperate for Greater London to talk to all the surrounding authorities and reach agreements by contract to accommodate some of the London housing need that can't be accommodated in London. And I'd be interested to hear what people say about that. Thank you.
Can I take another question just so we can get more people talking? If
where everyone try to remember that.
Hi, Loom here. It's one of the frivolous bunch at Transport for London. Although this is somewhat unrelated to housing, it's still pertinent to the facilitation. So we've mentioned about apprenticeships being vitally important, in which they are, but only 52% of the 40,000 undertaken in 2014 were completed, compared to a national average of about 77%. I was just wondering how the floor would to address this.
Sorry, 50.
Sorry.
I think hold it very close to you.
Apologies. Only about 52% of the apprenticeships undertaken in 2014 were completed,
Okay.
compared to the national average of 77.
Let's go and go through that in turn. I can't remember who's going first. It's probably back to you, Sian. You go first. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, the question about drops in the bucket, I mean, I think we do need lots of, it's a multi-thing tackling the housing crisis. I mean, people are out there looking for a silver bullet, an amazing way to save everything. But I think we do have to look at it in the round and do as much as possibly can in as many different ways as possible. One of the ways is not losing what we currently have. We are seeing the net loss of homes on estates, of affordable homes on estates, when they're regenerated by Labour councils, by Lib Dem councils across London. We can't afford to do that. But we have the opportunities coming up of all the public land that's coming forwards, and we have the rewriting of the London plan. And I think we can make a massive, massive difference there. Like Caroline has said, we need to keep the Olympic precept going. We need to be putting more money from council tax in there as well, and creating a fund, and then doing the most creative things we possibly can with that fund. Lots of different models, smaller sites. We can use the creativity of London's professions, London's communities, to really fill London with homes. And I don't feel that optimistic about it. That said, the duty to cooperate is really important, and we haven't done very much with it yet. And I think the opportunity comes there when we're bringing the privatised rail franchises under TfL's control. That will give us a load of reasons to talk properly to the councils around London about where we can help them give people places to live within easy reach of London. And I think that's another really important part of the drops into the bucket.
Andrew.
With regard to the apprenticeships, didn't realise that. Got to work on it, obviously. I mean, and I'll be interested for you if we could talk afterwards, and we'll talk about what the reasons are. With regard to the more strategic approach, I was just checking a hashtag. You go to hashtag Tory reports and look at that will point you to the GLA Conservative site, and you'll pick up a document there called Southern Powerhouse, and it precisely raises those issues that you've raised, Mr. Summers, is it? Precisely those issues, that we mustn't be constrained by this artificial boundary that was the travel to work area of the 1950s. I mean, it isn't relevant to today's powerhouse that is the Southeast. And so we've got to look further than that. We've got to start being more ambitious with regard to building many more garden suburbs, and we've also got to solve the airport issue as well.
Caroline.
I mean, it is a really important strategic issue that we build the homes that we need in London, and part of that is about working closely with the boroughs to identify the land and look at other public land and other land, and to work with them to make sure we can deliver these homes. And at times, the mayor will have to get tough with some boroughs who won't deliver the homes that we desperately need. But it's not just housing, because it's fine, we can build all the homes in the world. We need school places, we need health, we need nursery places. We have a crisis in London where 10% fewer women are returning to work because they can't secure an affordable childcare place for their child. That's a huge drain from London's economy. Very qualified women not returning to work. We need to be building the nursery places as well, and obviously the health facilities and the business places. We've got a Conservative government who is allowing business premises to be converted without planning permission needed into housing, not having to contribute anything to the affordable element. This is causing a problem in terms of small businesses in London, and is not helping the housing crisis that we face.
Val.
Yeah, it used to be the case when we last had a Labour mayor that there were regular planning meetings and discussions, forums held with the boroughs around and outside London, and there was quite a lot of voluntary cooperation that went on in the context of the London plan, but issues on things like dealing with helping gypsy travellers sites, development, etc. So, and that is something that's lapsed, and I think it's been a great shame. And it's been very interesting that since we've been having discussions with the boroughs outside of London, most recently Kent, about TfL taking over rail franchises that flow over the border, in particular, in this case, southeastern trains. Actually, there is a deal more appetite for collaboration between the boroughs around London and the councils around London than you would have thought. And I think there's something definitely that's got to be reinvigorated because it's in all our interests. And I think the other thing about the strategic approach is that whenever we go for something like Crossrail 2, the new, the extensions to the tube that we support, you've got to actually do the work to have a proper local planning framework put in place that maximises the take-up of development of the land in and around the interchanges and the stations that are being put in place. And in a way, the new funding regime for transport will facilitate that, because actually you won't get funding for transport developments in London now unless there is a strategic planning framework.
Peter.
Yep. In terms of an overall strategic planning, you know, how can one plan if one does not know how many people you're planning for? This seems to me to be at the crux of it. You know, I mean, essentially people say 40,000 will build, 40,000 will build, 50,000 will build, 60 or whatever. That will take care of like half a year. The fact is, I would say there has got to be a fair, ethical and controlled immigration situation for Britain and for London to ease this housing crisis. It seems to me to be sort of almost a form of insanity. People will not even suggest that this is actually part of the problem. You know, London is actually growing basically at the rate of about a million a decade. This is unprecedented, not just in Britain, but in modern times in a city like this. And therefore you have to look at the demand side and the supply side. Otherwise, you know, you will never be able to plan.
Okay, we're going to move on to infrastructure, and I will come to the floor as quickly as possible. But according to the London Infrastructure Plan 2050, London needs £1.3 trillion in infrastructure investment. How do you see yourself working with government as it devolves more powers to address London's infrastructure needs? Would you consider asking for additional powers or taxes? And what would those be? And Andrew, you'll start.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm giving you 40 seconds, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. You need more powers to London to raise its own funds, and then you can start leveraging in other funds, and that sudden, though, that £1.3 trillion investment starts to become viable then. But it isn't viable for as long as you're behoving to the exchequer to constantly going for permissions for this, that, and the other. So it makes sense that we need to devolve power down. I don't think there's going to be any disagreement with the devolution on this panel at all.
Caroline.
Absolutely, we need to see property taxes devolve. What I would suggest, because I think the Treasury, they don't ever want to let go of the purse strings, I would like to suggest that for Crossrail 2, we should be looking at ring fencing an area around the route and where we could get stamp duty devolved for that particular area to pilot that, to see how that could work to help fund the new line. We've got to capture this increase in land values. We've seen it with Crossrail and so on. We've seen some good models. Crossrail as well with the community infrastructure levy, the Northern Line extension as well, incremental business rates. We've got to look at all those things because a begging bowl to government is not going to work going forward. We need to make sure we can finance these things ourselves.
Val.
Yes, there's been a very strong cross-party agenda on devolution, financial devolution in London, and the London Finance Commission, which Tony Travers chaired, was something we all were party to and involved in. And I think many of those instruments that we already use, we know there's a future for them, the community infrastructure levy, the TIF. I think in terms of taking it further, I do think that opportunities for being given powers to do things like generate bonds in London and deploy some of our own public sector pension resources towards infrastructure development, is all in the community's interests, and those are all things that we should be doing. And I think the future is local.
Peter?
Yes, I mean, I think devolution sort of in London is sort of inevitable. I would like to see, for example, the mayor be able to set business rates, for example, in London. I think that that's something which we should definitely look at. I think it's absolutely the case. I don't like new taxes particularly, but before we get to do devolution, as I said earlier, I think we've really got to look at the way that City Hall generally operates and the way that actually it operates its budgets at the moment, because I think there's a huge amount that it could put its own house in order before we devolve.
Sean?
I agree with that. I think we all want more powers. We're all starting to be mayor. We're going to get a lot of power if we win, but we want more powers as well. People have mentioned all the property taxes and the business rates that we need. And it makes perfect sense, because if we're going to do improvements in the area, capturing the value of those improvements in order to pay for them makes sense. It's like with transport. If you can get more people walking and cycling, you make them healthier. But we don't save in London the money on the NHS, so we can't capture the value, and it's the same principle. There's one tax I want to mention before we finish that we are due, which is the new road tax that the Chancellor announced last year. That is going to be hypothecated for the first time since the 1930s to roads and road maintenance, and it's going to go, according to them, to Highways England. Now, Highways England don't run the strategic roads in London. We have them devolved. We run them through TfL, and we should get our share of the road tax that our drivers are paying, and that will be hundreds of millions of pounds every year. And we can, there's no way legally the government can deny us that money. And I think people should not be forgetting that we have that money coming to us as well.
I think it's fair to raise that the only difference that there is, very, very quickly, the only difference there is between the parties, and I don't want to go into it, is how much we then devolve onto the boroughs. But that's really the only disagreement that we have.
Okay, let's open it up. And I haven't taken any questions from the back, so if anyone there is particularly desperate, and yes, thank you. I don't really think I'm overlooking you.
Robert Holden, I'm a landscape architect. What happens when the Thames barrier no longer works? The GLC design life was coming to an end in 2030. What happens when the Thames barrier no longer works?
That was the Thames barrier. Could you just repeat?
Thames barrier. Thames barrier.
Thames Valley.
Oh, Thames Valley.
Barrier in the River Thames.
Barrier.
Flooding. It's a flooding question.
Thank you. Can we take another 2 questions? So let's make a note of that. Can we take a question? And wave at me if you're desperate to ask.
This is a bit of a link question. I've worked in Thames Gateway. I worked on some of the work for 30 years, and the problem in that area is the infrastructure's never been delivered. The framework should have been reversed. The PTAL rating should have been projected forward so that it funded the infrastructure. I was working on a project in Havering where they wanted to build very low density housing on a site with flood risk, pollution, and was supposed to have a station in 2000. It's only going to get a station in 2020. You cannot delay those sort of bits. This was just a station on an existing line. The problem is PTAL ratings are lodestone, and local authorities that don't want development will use it to reduce the amount of housing in their area. It's quite within the capacity, because they did it at Vauxhall, to project PTAL ratings on new infrastructure. This would allow a lot more growth in the areas and is currently being planned because people look backwards. You cannot look backwards to define density. You've got to look forward and say what you're going to build and how you're going to put the infrastructure into work.
Okay, we'll take one more question. You were waving frantically at me. And then if you want to address whichever of those you have time to, you can probably pick on the panel.
Sarah Kassam from the Chartered Institution of Building Services Engineers. And there's lots of campaigning going on at the moment to make energy efficiency a national infrastructure priority. What do you think we should be doing in London? Because we've mentioned resources and climate change, and our existing building stock is actually going to be the big issue. What coherent plan do you all have to offer on energy efficiency?
Okay, have no idea who's due to start. Does anyone? Caroline, do you want to go first?
Okay, in terms of the Thames barrier, I think it's supposed to last now, I think they're saying, until 2070. But the thing is, it has been used more and more since it was first been about 100 times, I think, since 1982 it's been used. Clearly, flooding is a real risk in London. There has been work put in place to stop the risk of flooding for some properties, but we've got to make sure that the materials that we use when we're building, in terms of porous materials and so on, help to alleviate some of those threats. In terms of infrastructure, if I understand, trying to follow your question, but I think what's really important is that we do plan ahead. When you look at Crossrail, it first came up in 1974. We're only just building it now. We've got to make sure we are building for the future. We are building things like Crossrail 2 and Bakerloo line extension, so on, and build for the projections that we have in terms of our population. And what's really important, for example, the London Overground extension, there is the box ready for a new station near Millwall when the buildings go in there. So it's really important that we start to plan properly ahead. And if London had its own finances, it would be able to do that better. I think I'll leave it there.
Okay, lovely. Val.
The Thames barrier, there were discussions starting about replacing a new development to replace the barrier, and I don't know what's happened about those recently, but certainly it was something that Ken Livingstone had in hand. But I also think it's important to recognise that a lot of the flooding problems we face in London are localised riparian flooding, and they are about flash flooding, hard surfaces, and the need to actually make sure we have sustainable urban drainage, and that we reinvent making sure we've got front gardens and we've got permeable surfaces around our urban design, and that is really, really important. Energy efficiency, I think it's really important that we take the low-hanging fruit and fund proper insulation schemes. It's particularly difficult in London with so many people living in flats, and I think it's been unfortunate there's been a lot of attention just to the kind of single owner occupiers. We've got to do something about our flat stock and our public housing in particular. On the Petal Index thing, I absolutely get the point, and I think in a way optimistic about this one, because the old Treasury funded model was always demand-led, which meant there was a huge lag. You waited until everything was bursting at the seams before you got anywhere near some transport funding. And the point now is that the shift to devolved approaches to funding gives us an opportunity to have regeneration-led transport development, which means that you can put the infrastructure in early and the growth comes afterwards. And I think that makes so much more sense.
Okay, Peter.
Yes, I mean, I would just add to that, you know, obviously forward planning, in relation to my remarks earlier, of course, as much as you can. With Crossrail 2, I think that as I understand it, by the time it actually comes into action, it might already be obsolete. But whatever happens, until actually it's completely agreed upon, there should be no more money spent on it. So at the moment, I think it's absolutely tens and tens of millions already being spent on this thing. But of course, you know, in terms of the growth of your city, you know, of course you've got to be as forward planning as possible. But I do think it's incredibly important that when you do that, you do remember, without wishing to sound too flowery here, you know, the soul of the city. You have to remember that it's not just about economics. You have to think of the whole soul and the whole character of the city. And I think that that's a crucial part, which I think in the past has always been missed. It's always been kind of the rush for the big buck, as it were.
Sian.
Okay, so if I understand the question correctly about the PTALs, public transport accessibility ratings, you're talking about them using a sort of predict and provide methodology there. And I think, you know, using it as an excuse to build at low density. And then not providing anything because people are at low density and therefore car dependent. We see exactly the same problem with the Thames the crossings of the Thames in East London, where people will point to the fact that there you've got low PTAL ratings, or rather high ones, low ones, and low access to public transport, and therefore people are in their cars, and therefore you should provide more crossings for cars. And that's completely the wrong way around. I think you're right, we need to be building for what we want. We need to be building for the public transport accessibility that there will be, and then putting that in place as the houses come online, not waiting for the demand to be there. There was a study done recently that showed that if every borough in outer London had the same parking requirements as Sutton, I give credit to a Lib Dem council here for having very low parking standards. So you don't build many parking spaces for every new home, you build at quite high densities. We could have had 4,300 more homes in the last 3 years alone in Outer London because we've been building parking spaces instead of homes. I think it absolutely has to be done in that way. Can I just say about insulation? Sorry, in 2008 I had a policy to give free insulation in a staged way to everybody in London. And it was the most important thing. We were so far behind. And the government, this was using the CERT scheme, and the government since then have replaced that with the absolutely useless Green Deal. So I think we have to find a way of making a new Green Deal for London, finding the funds for that. We'll be starting to find it from a new energy company, which we'll be putting together, and we'll try and do it right this time because it's just an absolute waste. And I live in private rented accommodation, and private rented accommodation is some of the least energy efficient in the whole of London.
Andrew.
I thought we already were doing it now. I mean, all the developments I've looked at recently, they are anticipating public transport developments and applying a PTAL to it. However, where I may disagree with you is that I think PTAL is a tool. I do actually believe that in localism and local choices, and if a local authority wishes to grant a planning application at low density for good local reasons, and the PTAL rating is such that it says it should be higher, it shouldn't be made to do so. It is about local choice, and I think that is possibly something where I would certainly differ from the Greens and other people on this panel. With regard to energy efficiency, in Zac Goldsmith, you've got somebody who's absolutely wedded to the idea that we need to pay attention to how efficiently we are using energy. And just to plug GLA Conservatives again, hashtag Tory reports. If you look up a report there called Radically Normal, there, I published a report that absolutely proved that you can have things like Category 6 housing and pay for it as well. It doesn't need to be subsidised. So it is possible. We've got to try all this stuff. And the last one is Thames Barrier, and they know so much more about it than I do. I mean, it needs to be funded, obviously.
Right, lovely. Well, we're going to have closing statements. We're going to do them in reverse order. So, Peter, you're first. You have 2 minutes if you want to, but you can stay sitting here.
No, I don't mind staying here. Elongate the whole thing. No, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've got a drift of my attitude to London and development, the way I see it should go. We haven't had the chance tonight to slag off the Garden Bridge, but I think you get the general impression that most people seem to be against it. But I care hugely as a Londoner about London, but there isn't just the mechanics, if you like, that is represented by the economy and represented by that part of the city. There's also, as I said, its soul, and that is to be seen in the surroundings and in the infrastructure. And so therefore, my main concern is that people now feel increasingly powerless over that infrastructure. So I think it is desperately important, and one of the chief pleasures it would give me as mayor would be to actually return planning to a local democracy level, as opposed to the kind of overweening powers that the mayor now has, and indeed actually look like they're going to increase quite dramatically. Thank you.
Well, London is a great city to live in, and I think it was a global leader in many things like tackling climate change and our agenda for development and regeneration and the Olympics. But actually we are in danger of slipping behind. And one of the things that I think is most tragic is that we have not put enough energy into ensuring everybody in London has got a safe, secure, affordable home to live in. I think it was tragic that Mayor Boris Johnson took about 2 years to get a housing strategy together and has never managed to hit his own housing targets. And I do think that many of the projects that have been going on that have been successful and will be successful for the future, like Crossrail, started under the previous mayor. We need a mayor who is going to use
the strategic powers of the GLA really actively, energetically and positively. This is a city that needs strategic development in transport. It needs huge energy in ensuring affordable housing. And many of the things, the challenges that we face at the moment, like the crisis we have in our health service at the moment, are because London is becoming an unaffordable city for the people who live here. The ambulance service told us they're having difficulty recruiting and retaining because people cannot afford the transport and people cannot afford to live here. And I do think the mayor that sees all of those problems and uses City Hall to its fullest potential is somebody that we're offering you in our candidate, Sadiq Khan.
Thank you. Caroline.
Thank you. Well, what an interesting discussion we've had this evening. It's only a shame we haven't managed to touch on the controversial subject of the Garden Bridge, which we've all managed to get into our questions earlier. But it really is time that we stopped talking, actually started doing something. I think we've reached a point in London where for too many people, our city just doesn't work. A point wherein working in London is no guarantee of affording to live in London, where the business of getting to work each day is an ordeal, and where congestion chokes up our roads and our children's lungs. And we need a mayor who's going to tackle these issues. Electing a mayor with fresh ideas, we can change this great city for good. With my costed plan for affordable homes and a building company at City Hall to get construction going from day one, with my plan to take some of the rush out of rush hour in the morning with half-price fares if you swipe in before 7:30, and with my plan to tackle air pollution and congestion head-on with tough measures to clean up our streets. You know, this election is a real opportunity. It's a time for a fresh start in London, to choose ideas and experience over egos and bravado. It's an opportunity where together we can make London a city that works for everyone. Thank you very much.
Andrew.
Boris Johnson in his period of office, despite one of the worst housing slumps in a generation, and worst economic crisis in a generation, succeeded in building a record number of affordable properties in London, considerably more than his predecessor, and the highest number since the early 90s. To hear my opponents, you would have thought he'd done nothing. Actually, what you need is a continuation of the efforts that Boris Johnson has had, a continuation of the success that Boris Johnson has had in London. You need somebody who's not going to seduce you with unachievable targets, not going to try to buy your votes with an expensive reduction in fares that will take from the infrastructure budgets of TfL 1.9 billion pounds, but actually is going to level with you and say London is a place that we can all benefit from, and that candidate who is making those promises and going to continue the record of Boris Johnson is Zac Goldsmith. And may I also say, he's going to continue to welcome every immigrant that comes to London, and welcome them because London is a city that was made by immigrants, and let's not forget that.
And Sian.
Thank you very much for having us and for the really interesting questions as well. It's great to have such an expert audience. We didn't get to talk about the Golden Bridge. I'm quite sad about that. We also didn't get to talk about some of the good ideas that we've been putting forwards in so far in the campaign. I really wanted to talk about my flattening the fares plan. I think that would open up development opportunities right across London. By getting rid of the snobbery of the zone system would be really exciting. We didn't talk about my plan to close City Airport, to buy it and close it and turn it into a new quarter for London. The excitement of being able to plan a whole new area of London, I hope would get you interested, and please look it up on my website. We also didn't talk about the renters union that I have planned, the Bank for London, or much about the energy company that we want to set up. But all those things are about building a better London, and the idea behind most of them is about giving London back to Londoners, because I think what's really characteristic of the way Londoners feel at the moment is they feel buffeted by market forces. They feel like the city is spinning out of their control. And I think people in local councils, people who are councillors like me, find this all the time from their residents and people they come into contact with, but also feel a bit like that themselves. And I think a mayor that comes into City Hall, a Green mayor who wants to give London back, will really make people feel like they have more control over their city again. We do have a vision of our own for how the city could be in the future, and it's an exciting green place where everyone has opportunities. But it's also a place where everyone in London has the chance to influence what goes on through all the different policies that we're putting forward, the new bodies we're creating, the new ways we're going to be devolving power to local areas. So under a Green Mayor, London would be in safe hands, but it would also be in Londoners' hands again. Thank you very much.
First of all, can we say a huge thank you to all the candidates? I think you'll agree we've had a great discussion tonight.